Good morning, I'm Sean Bailey and I'd like to welcome you all to this morning's meeting of the Police and Crime Committee. Our main business will be the discussion on the findings of the Daniel Morgan Independent Panel Report. Please can you make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode so we don't have any unnecessary interruption. Can I please ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if we have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Moema, for whom Assembly Member Clark is substituting.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendation set out in item 2 and ask if any members have any other interests to declare? Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Just in the report, it refers to a committee of the Metropolitan Police Authority that I would have sat on in the final few years of the authority. So it's not really a pecuniary interest. I just thought I should declare that I would have been there making a decision.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Duval.
Chair, I've taken some advice. I don't think I need to legally declare, but I am mentioned in the report as well as being the chair of the Metropolitan Police Authority at time during this this investigation. So for the sake of transparency, I think I should declare that I have some participation in these events over the years.
Thank you, Assembly Member. Can we confirm the minutes of the Police and Crime Committee meeting held on the 23rd of June 2021 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Can we note the completed, ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of this committee?
Noted.
Can we note the recent action taken by me as chairman in consultation with party group lead members to agree the committee's annual report 2020-21 Assembly year?
Noted.
We now move on to the main business of which this main business or question answer session on the Daniel Morgan Independent Panel Report. I'd like to start by welcoming our guests representing the Daniel Morgan Independent Panel. Baroness Alone, the panel chair. Good morning, great to see you. Dr. Sylvia Casale, CMC, panel member. And Nick Hunt, panel secretary. Good morning to you all. Thank you for sparing us this time. As is the tradition on our committees, I will take the first question and then my members will come in. This is a very detailed meeting we'd like to have, so can I ask you to really truncate your answers if you can so we can get through as much as we can in the short time that we have. So, my opening question really is the big one. Is the Met institutionally corrupt? I'll start with the Baroness, please.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman, and thank you very much to you and the members of the committee for allowing us to come here today and to give evidence on our report. We have found the Met to be institutionally corrupt, and the responses by senior officers to the report have been most disappointing. You know, the public statements which we have heard from the Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner and Assistant Commissioner in the days following the publication illustrate exactly the problem we have been describing. The only manifestation of corruption that they appear to be accepting is in Morgan 1, the first investigation. And that is based on the National Police Chiefs Council definition of corruption as set out by Sir Stephen Howes in evidence to you. And it's individual corruption only. We have demonstrated clearly the existence of that definition of corruption in Hampshire, in the Hampshire Police Complaints Authority report, even extending to the highest ranks of the Metropolitan Police and the Police Complaints Authority, and in Abelard too. The various definitions we cite don't cover the serious and egregious behaviour which we encountered when we were doing the work. The behaviour amounts to far more than Sir Stephen's concession that occasionally we may be overly defensive and that we could do more to explain what we do and why. We most definitely do not say that all officers are corrupt. We've been careful to choose our words when writing about institutional corruption. My colleague, Dr. Casale, led on the corruption, and I'd like her to explain to you, if you will, the definition of corruption and how we apply it.
Thank you. Thank you. Our report says that there are many honest police officers working very hard to serve the public in difficult and sometimes dangerous circumstances. So we have been very careful to choose the words that we use when we talk about institutional corruption in the Met. And if you look at paragraph 25, page 1020, we adopted a very broad definition of corruption based on the key elements of dishonesty and benefit. And that allows for the involvement of a variety of actors and a variety of forms of benefit. And the definition that we came up with is that corruption is the improper behaviour by action or omission by a person or by many in a position of power or exercising powers, which is what the police officers do. They might be acting individually or they might be acting collectively. They might be acting with or without the involvement of other actors who don't have or exercise powers. And we give examples of that in the report. As to benefit, the benefit may be direct or indirect to the individual or the individuals concerned, or it might be for a cause or an organisation that they value, or for the benefit or the detriment of other people. And if it amounts to corruption, it is because this behaviour is such that any reasonable person would not expect the powers to be used in that way for the purpose of achieving that benefit or detriment. So we have used this broad definition to consider the conduct of individual officers involved in the actual investigations of the murder of Daniel Morgan, and also the failures of senior officers acting as representatives of their organisations. And in this context, we report a wide range of actions and omissions by senior post holders on behalf of their organisations. And many of these actions and inactions have also been identified by other panels and inquiries before ours. They include things like failure to confront corruption, failing to manage investigations properly and ensure proper oversight, failing to take a fresh look at past mistakes and failures, and to learn from past mistakes and failures. If you don't look at what mistakes you've made and failures in the past, it's very difficult to learn lessons from them. Giving unjustified assurances about what has happened, failing to make a voluntary commitment to candour, and failing to be open and transparent about what has happened. And such failures on the part of senior officers or managers acting on behalf of their organisations do not all automatically fall into the definition of corruption. Some of them may be the result of professional incompetence or poor management. But when the failures cannot reasonably be explained as genuine error and they indicate dishonesty for the benefit of the organisation, in our view, they amount to institutional corruption, and that is what we meant when we talked about institutional corruption.
Thanks, Sylvia. Yes, so to summarise then, the report says that there are many officers working hard to serve the public in difficult and sometimes dangerous situations, but the Met as an organisation has not responded honestly to the public and to the family about the serious failures, including incompetence and corrupt acts, in the murder investigations over the past 34 years. Specific examples are given in Chapter 10, and they range through all the investigations. More recent examples include the activities of former DCS David Cook and the police investigations of his activity, which did not finish until April 2020. The Metropolitan Police has placed concern for its reputation above the public interest. There has been dishonesty for the benefit of the reputation of the organisation, and that is institutional corruption. And the statements made on behalf of the Met have continued to lack candour, even after the publication of our report, when they referred specifically only to the failings in the first investigation, and that obviously those failings have been the subject of a number of apologies prior to our report. This is a betrayal of the family, and it's also a betrayal of the public and of good, honest officers, and it will diminish trust. That activity, that behaviour within the Met will diminish trust in the organisation. And that's why, as Dr. Katsali said, we have recommended a statutory duty of candour to be owed by all law enforcement agencies to those whom they serve, subject only to the protection of national security and relevant data protection legislation. So, Chairman, the answer to your question is yes.
Baroness, thank you very much. And now I'd like to move on to Assembly Member Hall. Do you still want to come in?
Can I just quickly come in and just take it just a little bit further, and thank you for your explanation, and thank you for the work of your panel, because one of the issues was about bringing everything together so you could see it in totality, and clearly you've worked under some very difficult circumstances. So I just want to do that. So I just want to go a bit further of that. So because it's quite an important issue about the institutionalised corruption around that. Is it fair to say that in the latter stages, and as you rightly pointed out, in responses, the presentation of information has been about the presentation throughout the history of this has been one of denial, cover-up, or issues, and that really does lead you to your conclusion around that. But it's also about some of the issues that your panel faced in terms of access and the processes of that access. If you could just explain a little bit about that, because of course there are complex issues and there are some things that you would agree would not be in the rightly put in the public domain, and there are many things that should. It's a debate, isn't it, around that. And then I think the issues that's striking on reading your report is the interactions, and particularly with the family, the issue of the candour and about explaining not just what was going on, but what were the true facts of the matters throughout the years, throughout the ongoing process of these issues. Am I right in thinking that? And if I think about institutional corruption, separate out the individual officers, but look at the organisational bits about why you've reached and why you're strongly advocating that position that you're taking within your inquiry.
Yes, I think the most important thing to us is the failure to be candid and to be honest with people and to deny, the repeated denials of that there were problems, that there were failings and things like that. We did experience very significant difficulties in getting access to information, and we did find that the Metropolitan Police were defensive in when we looked for information. The theory was that all information there would be exceptional and full disclosure. And we had to make a lot of effort to make sure that we did get that. Our findings of what happened throughout each of the investigations were gathered together over a very painful process, and every word of the report is evidence-based, and you have the footnotes which refer to the evidence. So we can talk in more detail, if you wish us to do so, about the difficulties we had in getting access. The major difficulty being the fact that the investigation papers they were presented to us in crates, and they were all muddled up and mixed up. And there were no, when one goes in to investigate a police issue, one expects a file. We did not get files. What we got were crates of loose material. And the key to getting a handle on what had happened was the access to the homes, the computerized database which is used by police officers to conduct investigations. And I think there were maybe 6 or 7 homes accounts for different investigations.
Sorry, Baroness, can I just intervene there, because we have a list of questions and one of my other members will cover this.
Okay, well that's fine then. I was trying to answer Mr. Duval because he did ask me the questions. But yes, and I would like to say too at this stage, we're very grateful to Mr. Duval for his assistance to the inquiry. Thank you.
Can I move on to my next Assembly Member, please, which is Assembly Member Hall?
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, Baroness Owen, thank you very much for your work. Your findings did make very difficult reading. One What, I know this is going to be a difficult question, but what recommendations and actions from your report do you think that the Met should prioritise?
Thank you for the question. I think we can look at the recommendations almost in the context of the life of policing. So we would start with a statement that there should be proper and regular vetting, security vetting of all staff. We have heard significant evidence of vetting failures, and we have seen that evidence. We have seen, for example, that the officer who was tasked with making documents available to us and deciding what our staff could and couldn't see was in fact not vetted himself. We had to have him vetted. And you will have heard recently the vetting failures and in the context of the case of Sarah Everett, a terrible case. We haven't seen any evidence to support the Metropolitan Police assertion that vetting is now adequate and effective. We have major concerns about failings in this area, and we think it's not enough just to vet their employees in accordance with the measures, but they need to have effective and adequate measures to ensure that the staff are not currently engaged in crime or in serious wrongdoing. We think that all police officers and police staff should be obliged to register in confidence with the chief officers of their police force, either at the point of recruitment or later on if necessary, their membership of any organisation, including the Freemasons, which might call their impartiality into question or give rise to a perception of conflict of loyalties, because you will know that the issue of whether Freemasonry impacted on this investigation has run through the years. We did not find any evidence of such an impact, but we think it's hugely important in terms of public confidence that there be a register which is kept by the Chief Constable and which would be accessible in prescribed circumstances so that the public and other police officers could have confidence. We received current evidence, and you will read about it in the report, of the influence of Freemasonry in Metropolitan Police.
So you think that that's the most important thing to start with? All of your recommendations are important, but that you would prioritise? I
think I would prioritise vetting, and then the next thing I would prioritise is honesty and integrity in communications with families. I think it's vital for community trust, and it's vital for victims' families' trust, because the effects of the inaccurate statements, which were so corrosive for the family members of Daniel Morgan and that of the public, you'll find this in Chapter 12. And there was a very poignant statement by Daniel Morgan's son, at page 1228. He said, he has lived with this all his life. He said, I don't want this to be my son's future. I want to be able to show my son the panel's report and say to him, look, eventually the state can get it right. That would be good. So honesty and integrity. And this duty of candour, I think, is the most important point we're making.
Thank you.
But there are other important areas in the report.
No, there are. We've read them, and it's only because of time. Just a yes or no on that. Did I hear you correctly say that when you said you'd asked for some files, you didn't get files used, and I think you said you got crates of loose paper. Is that correct?
Yeah, there were, I can't remember how many crates, I'm not sure, hundreds of crates. And they were all, there were bundles of paper, there were individual sheets of paper, but they were not a file such as I would see normally in police, and I have some experience of calling the police to account, obviously. We didn't get files. The first thing we had to do when we got the crates of material was to create what we called the Morgan 1 investigation file, but the crates were not complete. We discovered when we finally got access to the Holmes accounts that the crates were not complete, that there were documents on the Holmes accounts that weren't in the crates, and there were documents in the crates which weren't in the Holmes accounts. So it was trying to build the complete investigation picture was made profoundly difficult.
It looked as if things had been taken out, or it was just not dealt with properly?
I think what had happened was there'd been ongoing 30 years of investigation. Various people had come back, done little investigations, little inquiries. There'd been a huge process of disclosure for the Metropolitan Police. I cannot account for the state in which the documents came to us. I think the Metropolitan Police must do that. I can say that I was surprised, I was astonished that we didn't get proper files, and that it took us a long time to sort the documents because we didn't have access to the Holmes accounts, so that we could build the picture It's like a
No,
jigsaw.
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, we can ask the police that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for those answers.
Can I move on to Assemblymember Desai, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. And can I join the Chair and Assemblymember Hall in thanking you for all the work that you've done in compiling this report. Baroness Olon, if I could ask you, you talked a fair bit about candour, and I think earlier on you said that the Met continues to lack candour. So you proposed a statutory duty of candour to be introduced for law enforcement agencies in the UK. So if we had such a statutory duty, how would this have helped improve the Met's handling of the Daniel Morgan case?
Because it would impose a very clear and direct duty on them to be honest in their dealings with victims, families and victims of crime. The situation is that there are some areas of police activity which you all know are sensitive and which require to be protected. But it is eminently possible to deal with issues, as we have done in the report, without breaching any national security or without putting people at risk, and yet at the same time, to be honest, what we saw was a denial that there were problems, and there definitely were problems. So the statutory duty of candour will impose, if you like, it will impose an obligation to behave in a way different from that which they currently behave in. There is a similar statutory duty in the health service now.
Yeah. And so presumably a breach of statutory duty would result in disciplinary action and...
Yes, yeah.
Right. So in 2011, I think the then Commissioner Tim Godwin apologized to the family, and we had Sir Stephen House here a few days ago offering a similar apology. And the Mayor has said that it's his and the Met and the government's responsibility to win back the trust of the family. Now, actually hesitated in asking this question, but I will still ask you this. You can have apologies and apologies, but if they're not backed up by action, then they really don't mean anything.
Yes, you're quite right.
I mean, my formal question was going to be, what further apology do you believe the Met should make to the Morgan family?
Yeah.
But we've had apologies already, and that's why I hesitated to ask the question.
Yeah.
But I still will put it to you formally.
Yeah, we spent quite a lot of time trying to work out what the Met were apologising for in the first instance. It was not clear. When we asked the questions, they couldn't tell us.
Yes.
Even you mentioned Acting Commissioner Tim Godwin's apology after the collapse of the trial, which was, generalised. So we went back to the Met, and having tried to find out what they were apologising for in all the other apologies, because we needed to know specifically what had gone wrong, they said to us, even as Tim Godwin's statement, they said, well, we cannot be accountable for statements made by individual officers. So we said, well, there must be briefing notes, which led to the creation of this statement by Tim Godwin. But they said we would have to speak to the individual officers and ask them to explain the statements which they've made. That is not acceptable. And as for apologies, in paragraph 502, we list the things that we think the family of Daniel Morgan suffered. We think a further apology, a proper apology, is needed, accompanied by action, the kind of action we're talking about today. But at paragraph 502, for example, you have the failure to bring the murderers to justice for which they have apologised, the misinformation which was put into the public domain, the denial of failings in investigation, failures to acknowledge professional incompetence, failures to acknowledge individuals' venal behaviour, managerial and organisational failings, and there were massive managerial and organisational failings, and unwarranted assurances given to the family. The Metropolitan Police consistently placed its reputation above its duties of accountability and transparency. So those are the kind of things they should apologise for the distress and the terrible distress which you saw when you took evidence from Alistair Morgan 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Can I move on to Assemblymember Devonish?
Thank you, and good morning, and thank you from me for all your amazing work. Two very quick questions. Do you think the existing Met culture harms fighting crime, and is corrupt behaviour by police officers, in your opinion, still prevalent within the Met?
Yes, of course, it does harm the fight against crime, because for a number of reasons. One is that those engaged in crime know how things happen within policing, and they can get great comfort from the contacts which they have and the way in which things are dealt with. And particularly even in terms of knowledge of what's going to happen and what has happened. So those kind of issues are important. We have received very extensive evidence from the Metropolitan Police of anti-corruption measures which they've taken over the years, and there has been some really, really good anti-corruption activity, and I don't in any way detract from what has been achieved. But, for example, we saw between 2006 and 2013, the former SIO, the Senior Investigating Officer of the final investigation, was abstracting intelligence and investigation material for the purposes of writing a book. Now, the Met will, and every police force will go for the officer who goes and gets a piece of information out of the police national computer, maybe an address or maybe some detail of some kind. But this huge abstraction of material was able to continue, despite all the provisions and policies that they have. We have seen the response of the Metropolitan Police to matters which we referred to them, and even matters of which they became aware, like, the leaking of the Operation Tiberius report. I think it was 2014, I'm not sure, but we were astonished because they found a copy of the Operation Tiberius report in David Cook's house in 2014. Now, I am not saying in any way that David Cook was in any way responsible for the leaking of that report. But the important thing was, when we went to interview him in 2020, after the Metropolitan Police had finished their investigations of him, we asked him, how did he get a copy of it? And he said, nobody ever asked me that before. Now, if they knew they had found it at his house in 2014, and if they were concerned about the security of this is a major intelligence report on major crime groups in London, and it was on the web and still is on the web, you'll find it there. If they were concerned about that, we would have expected there to be a follow-up. Where did you get this from? Who gave it to you? Who else knows about it? Those kind of things are profoundly important. We didn't see that. And I think that as the public see the kind of things that we had to report, and they do see them, I think that the failure on that scale to tackle corrupt behaviour will inevitably diminish trust. And policing relies on consent of the public. And the consent is only available where the public have trust in what the police are going to do with the power which they have over them. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. And I'll add my thanks to you for this very important report. Now, you've talked about institutional corruption and given us a very clear definition of institutional corruption, in particular the sort of prioritisation of institutional reputation over accountability and transparency. Now, do you believe that the Met is capable of confronting institutional corruption, given the denials we've seen from the Commissioner and other senior members of her team, and your experience of conducting the investigation? We're seeing sort of crates of information that didn't seem to be complete.
Would you like to start?
Every organisation is capable of confronting the things that go wrong in the organisation. The question is whether there's the will to do it or not. I think that there are instances in which the Met have in the past taken measures and made very considerable efforts to deal with problems that they had within their organisation. And I would like to think that they could do that in the future too. But the beginning of that is of that process of dealing with the problem is to acknowledge it. And I'm afraid we don't feel that is the case at the moment. I think that it is a very difficult process, and I think that it takes not only acknowledgement, but a serious commitment to establishing the whole facts surrounding the problems. And we have tried in our report to put as much of the detail in, that's why there were 3 volumes of this report, to put in as much detail as possible to assist the process of addressing the issues that we have found. And they are the most serious issues. I do agree with the chairperson that this goes to the very heart of what policing is about, which is supposed to be upholding the law and serving the public. And I think that can be done, but it's a big task and it requires really genuine commitment.
If I could just add to that as well, we understand the Metropolitan Police are currently undertaking a review under Deputy Assistant Commissioner Barbara Gray, looking at this report and the findings, recommendations in it, but clearly it's important they understand what the panel are talking about in terms of institutional corruption and what it means in terms of the culture within the Metropolitan Police. So this answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think unless they read the report and really read the report, they will not address the failings that we've identified. And we saw so much of it. You know, we saw real senior officers trying to improve the situation, for example, where there was a real failure of governance of the second investigation, which led to this hugely protracted investigation, and ultimately it collapsed. Senior officers were going to the Assistant Commissioner John Yates and saying, we need to put this back into the system, we need to make this properly regulated. It didn't happen. There's never been any acknowledgement of those kind of things and the consequences of them for the investigation with which the Met were charged.
Lula, we might say something about resources also.
Yes, we do accept that there's a limit of resources. And we know that decisions have to be made, but we don't think I suppose if you look at it overall, although you may have a limit of resources now, what has happened in this investigation has been that huge resources have been put into it to no positive outcome. And I think that's a terrible indictment. We do accept there are resource difficulties. Do you want to say more?
Well, I think also, since looking at corruption and what goes wrong is part of the remit of the Independent Office of Police Conduct, that is an institution which must also have resources, because it does require resources in order to look properly at things and to make sure that you're not making false accusations, that you actually are basing what you're saying on fact, and that you're basing the solutions also on what you have found as a matter of fact.
Thank you. That's a very full and helpful answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Rogers?
Chair. Good morning, Baroness Alone. You have touched on this in answer to a previous question, but your report expresses some very serious concerns that a vast quantity of sensitive material was able to be removed and held outside the Met's secure systems. Do you have confidence that this could not happen again? And how do you feel the Met has responded to this particular issue?
We were very concerned about the response to the issue, and we were very surprised at how long it took them to deal with it, and yet really we are not convinced that this couldn't happen again. We're certainly not in any way assured that individual officers having access to material, and very often sensitive intelligence material, that they can't, if they wish to do so, take it away and use it. And I mean, the volume of material was described by a member of the Crown Prosecution, one of the Crown Prosecution Service lawyers, as being about 2 Eiffel Towers if you stacked all the material up. It's a huge volume of material. And he went over years, he was taking this stuff out. Nobody was picking it up. It was going out into his own computer. There were no controls over the computer systems, so that, you know, in the Home Office, for example, when we were doing this, we had to do everything on our Home Office secure computers. But the response which we received from the Met was, well, the computers are lousy and slow, so we had to use our own. The response we received from the officers was that the Metropolitan Police computers were slow and almost unusable, and that was why they used their own computers. And if I talk about the IOPC too, if I could just go back to the previous question, because there was a period of about 1.5 years when complaints made by Jonathan Rees and comments made by the judge, Mr. Justice Madison, at the time of the collapse of the trial, those complaints went backwards and forwards between the IOPC and the Metropolitan Police. Neither of them felt that I think that they had, well, the IOPC said that they did not have the resources to deal with it. They quite simply are not equipped to deal properly with major corruption on this scale. The police wanted an independent investigation. The system is not working. If the IOPC can't deal with the most serious issues with which it's faced, it's not working. So I think that's something you may want to consider. We are going to meet the IOPC also.
Over the course of the time you were investigating this, did you see any change or evolution into the Met's controls over how information is handled like this, and whether there were more controls put in place to prevent people from taking out information in this way?
No, we saw a lot of policies. We did see new policies, but policies are only as effective as to the extent that officers observe them and comply with them, and to the extent that there are audit processes to make sure that material isn't being abstracted. And we have not seen anything which assures us that this could not be happening today. And the outcome of activity like that is that you can get material, in this case we have material which was taken out and disseminated to journalists, which may well have been useful in a prosecution were a prosecution to occur in a number of cases. So the effect is you can lose the ability to prosecute. People's lives can be put at risk because their names and their details are in the documents. Huge distress can be caused to families. The ramifications are endless, and we are not satisfied that the documentation, the serious, very serious documentation held by the Met is safe as it should be today.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this report. I mean, it's a shocking read, a painful read, and this is a pivotal moment for the Met. Do they embrace this, or do they carry on sort of heads in the bunkers, as it were, or whatever the phrase is? Yeah. I've got a few questions for you. You've touched on it already. You've talked about the difficulties you encountered, restrictions imposed on access to certain documentation. This delayed your work. I mean, it's 8 years of work. I'm sure when you took this on, you didn't expect it to take that long. Do you think the delays that you experienced in accessing key information were deliberate?
We did not receive an explanation as to why it was 20 months from the establishment of the panel until we received the first documents. There were negotiations ongoing about the terms upon which we could have the documents, but the initial statement that we would have full and exceptional disclosure just didn't happen until 20 months later in January 2015. And the protocols which were finally agreed were very similar to the protocols with which we started in the first place. We felt it was unnecessary. Every time we asked for something, it was like a battle. We say, I think it's somewhere in the report, that it was as if it was the Metropolitan Police versus the panel as a litigant almost. Yeah. There was a very adversarial approach taken to our requests. The big difficulty which we did have, and which we spell out, and which I mentioned earlier, is the fact that these investigations were all conducted on the Homes account. So the Homes account tell you what information came in, for example, who was tasked to deal with it, what the outcome of what they did was, who didn't do what they should do, etc., etc. So you have a whole audit trail on the investigation. Now, the Commissioner said to me that she didn't understand why I wanted it. She was Assistant Commissioner at the time. And I looked at her in disbelief, and I can remember it to this day, sitting there, because we all know how investigations are managed. She said to me, you've got the hard copy papers, that's all that's everything is there. And of course it turned out everything wasn't there, but it's not just the papers, it's the audit trails that the Homes gives you, which were so important to us. And when they finally did grant access to it in 2015, they gave it to us as panel members, but we needed our staff to be able to access. Our staff were all security vetted to a fairly high level, and certainly well vetted. Our premises were examined by the Met, approved by the Met, and so there was no reason why we shouldn't have had Homes accounts in our offices on a computer. But every time we asked for the Homes accounts, the computer, so that we could work in the office, so all our staff could work on it, and we could actually do the job more expeditiously, we were told no. We got the right for one officer to go to Metropolitan Police premises across London, to gather up lists of tasks from his colleagues, then to go and look them up, and then to bring it back, and then if the colleagues had further questions, he had to go back again. It was just so awful. And we kept on asking for direct access in the offices, and we were told it would cost various things, and we kept asking, and in 2019, they told us it would cost £85,000 to allow us to have access to the Homes accounts in our offices and for them to be removed from our offices. And it just beggared belief, £85,000. And they kept making demands for more security. I mean, we were in a secure office approved by the Metropolitan Police for the holding of secret documents. But they kept coming and saying things like, so we need to strengthen the doors and the windows and the walls. And when we challenged it, they said, no, okay, you don't need to do that. So you'll understand why we felt we were being...
Question is, do you think it was deliberate? Your description of it to me as an outside observer is it was deliberate to try to restrict your access.
Well, I think that police officers know they have to protect the information which they hold, but I think the response which we received was not consistent with the commitments which the Metropolitan Police had made, and the effect was certainly to slow us down enormously. We never received an explanation which I can understand and accept as to why we couldn't have the Homes accounts and get on with it.
In your report, there's clear criticism of Cressida Dick,
Yes.
particularly in Chapter 11, which refers to her time as Assistant Commissioner and the senior Met officer responsible for supporting the work
Yes.
of your panel. Now, the Commissioner has said, I have been personally determined that the Met provided the panel with the fullest level of cooperation in an open and transparent manner with complete integrity at all times. How do you respond to that statement from her?
I don't accept that they cooperated with us fully. I do not accept that. Eventually we got the documents we needed. We went on and on and on, finding new documents that we needed and asking for them, and then they would supply them to us. But the basic tools were denied to us from the beginning. And I think we actually, what happened was they had two police officers who were responsible for dealing with us and for providing material to us, who were, if you like, the gatekeepers to the material. We paid for those police officers over the 8 years, so they were not a cost to the Metropolitan Police. And yet one of them I say wasn't vetted properly, but even that, we had to make a 2-hour round trip every time we wanted to get access to secret and sensitive material. Panel members. We understand the need to protect secret and sensitive material. When we asked for a small part of it to be moved to central London so as to avoid the necessity for the journeys, they said yes, they could do that, but the two officers would then have to leave the premises where we went to look at the material. They would have to travel up to London to bring the material to central London where we might look at it, and then they would have to travel back again. So that would delay their work for us. So on every turn we seem to be facing problems.
Well, we should perhaps say that towards the end of our work, a better system of designated team of people to assist us was set up. And so for the last few years, we did actually notice that there was better response. And sometimes we even got a response from the inspector on the same day that we had asked for something. But of course, at that point, we'd already got most of the information, apart from the information that arrived in early 2021, which was the last of the information that we got. And so I think, to be fair, we must say that we did get some good cooperation from the designated team, but that was at a late stage of our work, and it would have been most helpful if that had been in place right at the start.
They realised that you weren't going away and you were going to keep on at this until you got to the bottom of it. So maybe that's why. Your report mentions that in 2014 it wasn't only access to documents that caused the problems, but it was also criticised the Met for frustrating and complicating the panel's desire to speak to former Met officers and personnel. Do you believe the Met were trying to manage the information given to the panel?
Yes. Yes. I mean, what they wanted to do is set up a process through which there was a single point of contact for the panel and all issues would be dealt with through that single point of contact, and the result would have been the Met would have known why individual officers wanted to contact us. We did get contact from individual officers who supplied us with information which was useful, and we had to ensure that the process which was set up was immediately taken down again, and the officers were told that they could freely contact us. If I could go back to Holmes, in fairness, I will say that in September 2020, a member of our staff was allowed to have an encrypted laptop after the COVID interrupted things, but it was a bit late.
Late in the day. But in terms of your access to current and former officers, once you got over this barrier, were you able to talk to them? Did you talk to, for example, Tim Godwin, who obviously you commented earlier his apology from 2011, and the Met referred you to him? Were you able to talk to him to get any clarity on that issue?
Sophie, can you?
Yes, you're talking about the senior officer of the last investigation.
Yeah.
Yes, it was possible to talk to various police officers. Of course, some people contacted us directly. They didn't want to go through any other channels, and we need to say that. And some people were quite courageous to do so. And one of our concerns, obviously, is that when people give information, they should be able to do so candidly. Yes. And their information will be weighed up just like every other information. It's not taken at face value. We have to corroborate, we have to check it out, we have to make sure that it holds water. And people need to be protected.
Yeah. And if I can go back to the Tim Godwin issue, the issue for us was not what Tim Godwin said. It was how it came about that he said it.
To get there.
And, you know, I think it was a terrible thing for the family to hear what he said and not to know what it was they were apologising for, and not to know that so much had happened in the course of the investigation which had, in effect, prevented the investigation from being effective. I mean, we talk in the report, for example, about the fact that this was the Daniel Morgan murder investigation, but in fact they were doing other investigations which had come to their consciousness with, you know, a major robbery, an attempt to murder investigation. There were 4 or 5 other satellite investigations which were running simultaneously and which were going to the Crown Court, some of which were going to the Crown Court. So there were parallel disclosure exercises running, and it was all unmanaged and disorganised, and the officers who were trying to do what they could, and there was some very good work in Abelard too in the final investigation, but I think their job was made so much more difficult by the failure to be honest about by the way in which there was a failure of governance, and then for the family I think it was the fact that there was no honesty around what had actually happened.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Panel, good morning. Thank you, if I can add my thanks to the invaluable service that I think you've done to this country and your dogged determination to get to the bottom of what happened. I think everyone here appreciates that. Obviously, it's taken a very long time to get to where we are. I wonder, given the process that you've had to go through and the problems that you've had to face, is there anything that you now, with the value of hindsight and reflection, feel that you would have liked to have done differently? And is there anything that you feel that you might have done better?
I'm sure that in every case that one handles, in hindsight, one might say, yes, I could have done that differently. I think the way in which the panel was constituted and problems arising from that created initial delays. And, for example, in March 2014, the panel was suspended. Its work was suspended for 6 months because it didn't have a chair, because the chair had resigned. I came in after that period. I suppose, you see, my determination was, before I took the job, I said to Cressida Dick, whom I met in April 2014, that we needed access to homes, and I understood that we were going to get it. I think if I were there again, I would refuse to allow anything to move forward until I had access to the homes accounts, because I knew that they were critical. I knew that there was a family desperate for information. We talked about how we might handle it, how we might move forward, and we decided that we would be pragmatic and we would work with what we had and seek the further information. But I think I would have, if I were doing it again, I would have said, no homes, we're not doing it. Sylvia, you may have views of that.
Well, no, I mean, I agree with that. We all thought we were going to get homes at that point because there had basically been a commitment to give it. So we were quite astonished when suddenly Cressida Dick asked, the Assistant Commissioner asked, oh, are you making a new request about homes? I mean, if it hadn't been so shocking, it would have been ludicrous. The problem is we either had to sort of throw in the towel at that point, or we had to try and do something. And we had built up some knowledge, and we already could see that there were enormous issues to be dealt with, that this was a really serious matter, and that the family had been doing everything that it could to try and get this to come out, to try and get the truth to come out. And we felt we couldn't give up. But I think it's a very important question that you ask, and I think if we were back then, we should have got it in writing that we were going to get homes. You know, we assumed that because in our terms of reference there is an undertaking on the part of the Metropolitan Police for full and effective disclosure and for assistance to the panel in its work, we assumed that that was good enough.
Thank you, Chair.
Very two quick interventions, Chair, from my part. In our previous meeting with Alistair Morgan, he raised the issues of, and I think it was with your predecessor, Sir Stanley Burton. Would it be a good example of the conversation that was had between the Met and himself about channeling information, which I think rightly the panel rejected as an example of trying to manage the information flow that was going to the panel? Is that a good example to use to explain that, or are there other examples that you could give us around that?
Well, I think the issue, that was about the issue of access to intelligence material and secret material and stuff like that. And the matter had not been determined by Sir Stanley Burton at the time that he stepped down from the inquiry. We certainly, I'm trying to think how I can word this to be fair. Can I ask you just to reformulate the question for me so that I can...
I mean, the issue is that, you know, I think we take from the documents, and we have had, we've all had previous experience about the police taking over the management of information and how they want it to go. Yeah. And what I'm trying to understand a bit further is looking for concrete examples where I might want to pose some questions to the police about where does that fit into your process and procedures, that's where you go. I know it's important that for confidential information that needs to be handled sensitively, but it just seemed to me that exchange raised by Alistair Morgan to us as a committee could be seen as an example of part of that management process of information that's given to the panel or only selectively to one member of the panel around that, when, quite frankly, as I think you've previously outlined, there's a number of issues about the security clearance of your staff, the security clearance of your building and access. Why would it need to go through one member when it's a panel deliberation rather than an individual member?
And the panel had decided that that was the case, and when I came in there was absolutely no question that all panel members would have access to all documents. We do understand the need for proper handling, but these matters are managed by the vetting processes that apply and the security document handling processes that apply. So there was no reason to prevent any panel member from seeing the documents. I do understand that the intelligence has to be protected, and part of our disclosure protocol said that if we wanted to use anything from any police document in the report, we had to get their consent. And so we, for example, when we drafted the first investigation chapter, we went through an early process of looking what that consent process might look like. And we sent them all the bits that we wanted to quote. And they came back with I can't remember the percentage, but a very, very high level of refusal of permission to publish. So we had to go through it, and we had to spend a lot of time working with them to say to them, we set up a template of the grounds upon which permission to use information or permission to access information could reasonably be refused, but there was no right to refuse access to panel members. And it was about the protection of life, protection of police methodologies, that sort of thing. But we faced this constant process through which we would ask for something. If you take, for example, the access to officers, that attempt to make us filter everything through them, the way in which we were able to hold material in our offices which were properly security cleared, everything seemed to be made as difficult as possible. Nick, maybe you...
Yes.
No, I mean, just on that point, most recently, Operation Edison, which is the Met's investigation of David Cook for the material they found at his house in 2014. Subject to an ongoing investigation, the CPS finally gave advice to the Met in April 2020. The advice being that there should be no further investigation. The Met agreed that, and so the panel asked to see sites of the Operation Edison advice file from the CPS and the Met decisions. It's classified as secret, which at the time was made extremely difficult in practice to get hold of the file because it's during the initial stage of the lockdown, COVID-19, back in April, May, June 2020. So the reality was that we had to go into the office to see the material ourselves. Myself and Baroness alone had to make journeys to do this. But it's just another example of yet another kind of difficulty. And we then challenged the file when we saw it, that the classification was too high. And subsequently they revised it to official sensitive material rather than being secret. But again, it's an example of making it more difficult for the panel to do its job than it needed to be. And we had to get into that process of challenging and reviewing and going back to the Met to get a decision changed to make it easier to look at the material that we wanted to see to complete the report.
You see, we were all at our own homes. I was in Northern Ireland. I had to fly to London in April, May to actually read that report and then fly home again last year. And I do think there were many situations in which documents were initially classified as secret. So we had to travel out to the distant premises, the 2-hour journey there and back. And when we got there was no reason for a secret classification, and we challenged it and it was declassified. It just seemed to be at every turn. We do accept, I cannot emphasize too strongly, we do accept the need to protect information. And you will see in our report that we are cautious and very considered in what we say. And there is a tension between the protection of information and transparency and accountability and candour. But the Met haven't got the balance right.
Just finally, Chair, the difference between I don't think a distinction. The government set up a panel. Sorry, Chair, just go on. It's about whether it's if you were a judicial. I think this was raised by the family as well. If you were a judicial inquiry, would you have been felt treated in the same manner? I don't see a distinction between. I think there are different approaches. Judicial approach to a panel. Government, you've been set up by the government to get to the bottom of the truth, to find the truth in that sense. Do you think it would have been different if you had been a judicial inquiry? Do you think the MPS would have approached you differently, or do you think
if we had been a statutory inquiry under the Inquiries Act, we would have had powers of compellability and it would have been different. But we weren't. There were our advantages to being a panel, but there are disadvantages. And we sort of set it out in the report. I'm conscious, Chair, that you're aware of
Thank
time.
you. At least somebody is on my side. Thank you very much. That concludes our discussion for this part of the investigation. Thank you so much to our guests to give us this time and access to your expertise. You are very well versed in this, and we really appreciate this. At this point, I'll be calling an adjournment so we can swap guests. Thank you.
GLA Chamber Sound. 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 GLA, chamber, 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 sound.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Sean Bailey. Let me welcome you to the second part of our discussion this morning. I would like to welcome our new panel members, Sophie Linden, Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, Cressida Dick, Metropolitan Police Commissioner, and Barbara Gray, Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Met Operations. Good morning to you all. We'll now move on to the formal questions because we are tight for time. I'd like to address my first question to the Commissioner. This is the same question I posed to Baroness alone. Is the Met institutionally corrupt?
Chair, you've heard me say already, I suspect publicly, I don't accept that the Met is institutionally corrupt. I would like, though, even before I talk about that, to first of all acknowledge the horror of the murder of Daniel Morgan, to apologise again on behalf of the Met to his family, firstly because nobody has been brought to justice, that's a matter of regret, and secondly, quite clearly, in the intervening 34 years, a number of our failings have compounded the family's pain. The report that the panel that you've heard from this morning has delivered is a very significant report. We take it extremely seriously. We are and will carefully consider the whole report in its entirety, as well, of course, as focusing on the recommendations. As I, like you, would thank the panel for their hard work, and it has been clearly an enormous enterprise. It raises some very important issues, which we take extremely seriously. The themes, I think, include our relationship with the family, of course, corruption, policing's relationship with the media over the years, how we investigate murders, disclosure, a whole series of issues, handling of informants and protected witnesses. There's also a theme around defensiveness or transparency or lack thereof. And then, of course, there's an overriding theme that all of this is also about perceptions, and all of that plays into public confidence. There are many other issues as well, but I want to get on the record. I take all those issues really seriously. We do as a service. There's a huge amount to absorb in the report, and we have a team working very hard as I speak to do that, and we will be responding as soon as we can to various elements of it. In terms of institutional corruption, that's not the Met I see today. I know you had the Deputy Commissioner in front of the committee not long ago, and he said the same. We have undergone massive changes in our accountability in our openness, in our leadership culture, and of course in the way we deal with all of the above issues, but let me focus there on corruption. Our default position, I believe, is to publish and to be open, despite our, and in concert with our other responsibilities to protect, on occasion, people's lives, personal data, due process, all the other things under the law that we have to protect. But our default position is to be open. That is the leadership culture that I see. And in this very complex piece of work that the panel have done in relation to corruption, and it's a long chapter with many different concepts in it, and lots of different possibilities, they come to a conclusion around a new definition, both of institutional, of corruption itself, a totally new one, and then of this institutional corruption. Probably not appropriate to debate that here. Suffice to say, we need to absorb all that. I don't accept that that is the Met I know, and I find, bordering on offensive, I suppose, the suggestion that we keep things quiet to protect our reputation currently. That's not the Met I lead. It's not the Met I see. However, there may be occasions when we look like that, when we're perceived to be. And I'm absolutely determined, and I'm sure we'll look to the future, I'm absolutely determined that we up our game on our openness and our transparency and showing people that that's who we are and what we do. There is still a perception that we are sometimes defensive or closed, as Steve said, and maybe sometimes we have been. I don't want us to be in the future, and I welcome everybody's help, including this committee's, with that. But many of you, not all of you, have worked with me for on and off for the last 20 years, and this committee is a good example, both of accountability and our openness. And many of the members of the previous committee commented on how open we always were as a team when we came to speak to you, how we try our level best to answer the questions, and how much we value external accountability, governance, scrutiny, and challenge, and criticism on occasion. We do.
Can I stay in a slightly different direction then? Still talking about corruption. One of the topics or themes arising from this is the culture. And if you're going to drive a culture of openness, do you believe that there's a failure or not on the part of senior officers to confront corruption? Is it something that people are aware of or don't have the mechanism or the personal bravery to confront? Are you supporting people to confront?
We absolutely are, and I am, absolutely. We have a very strong anti-corruption capability, of which I am very proud, who have had some excellent, but of course sad, successes in the last year. We have some very strong policies in place. An example and practices would be something called the right line, the anonymous line, which people can call in and say they've got a concern about this or that. I read all of those myself every month, and some of those result in investigations, and some of those have resulted in fantastically important pieces of work. We have constantly reviewed, and again recently, a way in which people can report issues of concern and be protected when they do that, so going beyond the whistleblowing policy. And we have a good record, I believe, which people can see, of showing what the learning is from a case where there has been apparent corruption, and showing our colleagues how they need to protect themselves from the ever-present risk and threat that there is, that people outside, malign actors, may wish to have access to information, may wish to seek to pervert, corrupt the police. So this is a huge part of our daily, weekly, monthly conversations. And again, there's a lot to absorb in the report. If there's more to do, I'll do it. And I'm sure there will be things we can usefully do, both to bear down further on corruption and indeed to improve our transparency. On the day the report was published, I spoke personally at my instigation to Her Majesty's Inspector, Chief Inspector Sir Tom Windsor, and I said, Tom, I'm hoping you're going to come and do an inspection here. Please come and please have a really good look at how we do our anti-corruption work and the culture within the Met that supports that. So I'm hoping that will, I'm sure that will come, and I'm looking forward to that.
At this point, I'd like to bring the Assembly Member Clark.
Thank you, Chair. The Commissioner, how can the public have trust in a police force that has been described as institutionally corrupt and whose response has been denial?
So let me start by saying I'm not denying that the report raises very important issues. I am certainly not denying that corruption is an ever-present threat to policing. I'm not denying that we can, on occasion, be less, be defensive and appear less open than I think we intend to be. People who, we have our ride-along scheme. People can come and look at just about every aspect of policing, as you know, and we encourage that. But I'm afraid this completely new definition, completely new concept for us, simply does not, on the one hand, sit very comfortably with the other previous working definitions of corruption that the police service nationally have adopted and other organisations too. But more particularly, when I read it, and of course we're in the early days of this, I simply don't think that it applies to my organisation as defined. And I think it has another problem, obviously, which is that it's a phrase that can be, and no doubt might be bandied about and mean all sorts of things to different people. And that's a difficulty with a completely new concept like that. So I believe that the vast majority of the public know that my officers are decent, honest, hard-working people trying their best in difficult situations. And all our surveys would show that. I am, of course, concerned, given that my twin priorities since I've been Commissioner for over 4 years have been violence reduction and improving trust and confidence in their Metropolitan Police by the public, especially those people who have less. I am concerned that this report, with the issues it raises and this phrase, may reduce trust and confidence. I haven't got the evidence of that yet, but it only makes me more determined to work on our trust and confidence in all its manifestations. That's a fundamental part of police legitimacy and a never-ending task, but something that is given extra momentum by this report.
Okay, thank you. And just to follow on from that, do you accept that there must be a fundamental change to the culture within the Metropolitan Police if we are to avoid the issues that have been raised within the report from resurfacing?
I would be happy to debate that, but my immediate reaction is no, not a fundamental change in culture, but we need to step up, and I don't want to repeat myself, on a number of the things we've been trying to do to show people that we are probably the most scrutinised, probably the most accountable, probably the most governed in many different ways police service in the world, and that we embrace that, and that we are open, and that we abhor corruption. We abhor it, and that we have vastly improved the way we deal with murder investigation, family liaison, the way we handle informants and witnesses, and the way we do disclosure. All these things have vastly improved over the years, and indeed our ability to learn, I think, has improved. We need to show people a lot more of this, and I'm really open to ideas that people may have. not just about sort of structures, systems, processes, leadership, messaging, but if there are things that people think go to a culture, then I want to hear about it.
Okay. And just to the Deputy Mayor, I just want to go back to the question that I asked the Commissioner. How can the public have trust in this police force?
So I think there is, and as the Commissioner's accepted, there is a concern that this report and the accusations and recommendations within it will have had an impact on trust and confidence of Londoners. And in terms of that, that is worrying and that is concerning. What I think we need to do in taking forward the recommendations of the panel is to look very carefully at the themes within it, that theme around transparency and accountability and openness. Now for me that's a really, when I've been reading the report, that's a really important theme that's come out of it, and I've written to the Commissioner to say that we need to take that theme and make improvements. I think by making improvements on that and being very open and transparent, more open, transparent and accountable, the Metropolitan Police can increase trust and confidence. My concern around the two when I read the report, and maybe an oversimplification of, or maybe reading it and oversimplifying it, there's two types of corruption that are referred to in the report. One, I would say the type of corruption that most people hold in their mind when they think about corruption, especially in relation to police officers, corruption for personal gain, bribery, that type of corruption, which the Met has apologised for in relation to the initial investigations in 1987 and the following investigations afterwards. And then a second type of corruption, which is the new definition, which is in the panel. That is a very difficult definition, and I think those two types of corruption are not necessarily kept apart and differently in people's minds. And I think that's where you get the problem, and that's where the rub is in terms of trust and confidence. So, in terms of oversight of the Met and in terms of oversight of the report, we will be working with the Met in terms of the actions coming out of it. And I know that Commissioner, and that's why Deputy Assistant Commissioner Barbara Gray is here, has set up a team, has taken this incredibly seriously, and we will be making sure there's proper oversight and accountability around taking forward the recommendations.
Thank you. And finally from me, back to the Commissioner, what do you say to the family of Daniel Morgan, who say that the number one priority of the Met should be to root out a culture of corruption?
I say again to Daniel Morgan's family that I'm deeply sorry at what has happened since Daniel was brutally murdered. I'm sorry that on occasions our relationship with the family has been very troubled. I'm sorry that on occasion we have failed in our duty to the family to keep them informed. I have, of course, written recently to Daniel's family, and I would be pleased to meet with them again and to listen to their current concerns and to discuss what specifically, if they are able, they think we should be doing, because as I've said, I am open to people's criticisms and comments and ideas. Tackling corruption is a very, very high priority for the Met, and it must remain so.
Thank you. Can I just move on, so I just need to catch up some time? We'll try and pick up at the end.
I just want to pick up on that point of around corruption, and particularly the second bit that the Deputy Mayor spoke of, and asked a question to Cressida direct.
Please be very quick.
Commissioner, clearly something went wrong, and I can understand why you might want to push back on that wider definition of corruption. But over the years, and we've just had a previous account with the panel members, there seems to have been something about the presentation of information provided by the MPS to various reports that either drop or omit certain key facts, that don't present it in quite the right way. And the panel makes the arguments very strongly that what's this about? What is this about in terms of is this about defending the Metropolitan Police Service by these omissions, or is it, I think in their phrase, incompetence or what? Now, you know, we can also talk about access to information. One of the issues of the panel, something seems to have terribly gone wrong in the relationship between the panel and yourself about providing that. And then we hear, and you've mentioned it earlier on, about interactions with the panel, or we can go back about interactions with the family and about whether the police were honest and truthful in some of those engagements. I don't understand that you've been given an opportunity by the panel to present evidence to counter that, and the panel told us they never received it. There was never really an explanation about some of those issues. Now, I've just zoned into a couple, and there's obviously wider, and I think in the report you've got a chance to present that. But is there anything you want to say to the committee to say about why you are so robust in saying there is, you know, why you can't accept the wider definition of the corruption? We get it, I get the commitment of dealing with individual actions or group actions of wrongly using, misuse of power, taking money. I get that. I think we all understand that. But in the wider issues, taken together over the years, presents a picture. You either counter that with evidence or you don't. And I presume that's what you're working on when we get your official response to this. But is there anything you can say to us today that gives us some confidence about that? Because I think that's the earlier question my colleague was saying around how, you know, in terms of responding to where the panel came to their conclusions.
There's an awful lot in that question, and again, it is you know, something that I would be very pleased to discuss, not least with you, of course, Len, because you have put so much passion and effort into, you know, you're a big part of getting us to this point with the panel report being published. And I'm delighted to discuss that with you and with others. There's a lot in the question, but I think in terms of the first failures that you talk about, referencing the panel's view of that, I think it is wise for us to absorb the whole report and have a really good think about that. But I would say there are occasions where the panel have formed a view, an opinion, which I think inevitably, when we have done that, we will say, well, we accept some of that, we accept it partially, or that's your view, but it's not actually our view. I hope there'll be, not too many of those, but I'm sure this could be an area. And if I give it as an example, they've obviously done a huge amount of detailed work, and they've come to their conclusions. And I really, I respect that. But repeated criticism of senior officers for not looking back at the original investigation and saying, we failed in the following specific ways, and, it was, I'm paraphrasing, just absolutely dreadful, and then assuming that the fact that they didn't say that is because they're trying to be dishonest, I think is quite a big leap. I think some of them, first of all, won't have had that view. They'll have thought it was adequate for the day. Some of them won't have known some of the things that were wrong with that investigation. And let's be clear, there was a lot wrong with that investigation, which I absolutely accept. So this is quite kind of nuanced territory. And I want to absorb the report and have a really good think about that. Now, when we come to the relationship with the panel, Chair, I should have said this at the beginning, but I know we've been in contact through your team a lot on this. I think, given that material is currently being assessed by MOPAC and indeed by the IOPC in relation to me, completely inappropriate for me to go into any detail. I wish I could, and I would be delighted to come back here in the future, or indeed, if you prefer, to write, obviously, once that is dealt with. But I mustn't do anything which looks like I'm trying to prejudice what any conclusions that either party might
I
come
just
to.
want to say, though, as far as this committee is concerned, there's no sub judice issues or any issues of prejudice because we have no indication there is any official inquiry into anything. And unless that situation changes, my members may still want detailed answers to any question that they could pose at this point.
Well, obviously, I can't stop people asking the question, but I've laid out my position, and it's a very clear one. And obviously, I've sought lots of advice around about this, and particularly in my position, where obviously I have a kind of public voice, I think it would be utterly inappropriate for me to say things which might look like I was trying to influence this assessment process, and I won't be able to. But I do understand the thread that you're sort of weaving there. I do, and I want to absorb it all then and come back with a thought through answer to that, because it's overall it is a very sorry read. It's a shocking report. It's hard, painful for people like me to read some aspects of this, and there's a lot that was wrong and a lot that went wrong. But this issue of how much information when was given about, for example, the previous failings, I think is quite I'm not trying to dodge this, but I think it's a sophisticated question that we need to give a considered answer to.
Sorry to intervene, but you say that the senior officers they receive repeated criticism for not telling why these failures happened. And there's a nuance here. I fail to understand what the nuance is. If there was a failure, why wouldn't they tell us why the failure happened?
So I think what I tried to say is this is over 34 years we're talking about. I think one of the criticisms is that, for example, the Police Complaints Authority, the Hampshire Police, people in the Met, the coroner, failed to acknowledge and say clearly enough what some of the original failings in the investigation were. My view is that some of them won't have seen those failings as starkly as we now do with the benefit of hindsight. Some of them won't have known about them, and several of them may have had a good operational reason, possibly, at that time that they felt it was inappropriate to talk about that particular thing now. So there's lots of possible explanations, and I just think, I suppose to put it more bluntly, it is very easy to sit in hindsight. It's harder to put oneself in the position of people who are trying to make choices in every situation about the best way to deal with things. And there are many examples of senior officers who made mistakes which they acknowledged very quickly to the family and tried everything they could, as far as I can see, to repair. And there are other people who the panel would say were not candid enough. And I'm simply saying I think it's very hard, without having really gone through the material, for me to come to a conclusion about that.
I accept your point about hindsight, but we've had 34 years is a long time for everybody to acknowledge where they might have had some falling downs. Can I move on?
Chair, if I might, I do think it's important to pick up on, to acknowledge what the Commissioner said in relation to the fact that MOPAC has, in line with its statutory responsibility, is looking into whether there are issues of conduct. That is a matter of public record, and I know that's a matter that you are very well aware of, and that's what the Commissioner is talking about in terms of some of the questions that it would be not appropriate for her to answer at this stage because of that assessment that is happening by MOPAC and also the IOPC, which is a matter for public record, which I think you were saying that you hadn't been informed of.
No, well, we contacted MOPAC. They weren't able to tell us if they were going to go one way or another.
Well, that's a different matter.
Hold on, but so from our point of view, unless there is an investigation, we are not transgressing, so we will ask all the questions. If MOPAC are going to look into the Commissioner's conduct, that would change the nature of some of the questions we would ask, and also the Commissioner's ability to answer those questions. But as far as this committee knows and is concerned, and we did ask MOPAC, that is not happening. If there's no decision pending, we can't act on that.
If I may, I think, well, just to make it really clear that this isn't a decision by myself, it's a delegated authority decision to the Chief Executive of MOPAC. So I am not involved in this decision. But has been made very clear, and it's a matter of public record, that there is an assessment as to whether there are issues of conduct. There is no decision yet, but there is an assessment, and that is what the Commissioner is referring to, and why it's inappropriate for some of the questions for her to answer.
We have history of that in this committee, but we contacted MOPAC and they said there was no decision pending anytime soon. So for us, that changes the complexion. If MOPAC thought it was an issue, then they could have said, and we would have readdressed or would expect the Commissioner to be in a slightly different position. But we've been officially told. We've been officially told by MOPAC that there is no issue around the Commissioner's conduct. So that's why these questions will be asked.
Chair, I'm sorry. I do have to put the record straight on this. It is a matter of public record that through delegated authority, to be absolutely clear, through delegated authority, it is not a decision that I take as Deputy Mayor. There is an assessment in line with our statutory, in line with MOPAC's statutory responsibility, an assessment around any issues of conduct. That has been made clear to the clerks of this committee and to yourself, I believe. I'm making it very clear now.
Let me rephrase it. MOPAC said that is a decision long into the future, so we can only act on what is happening now. They told us that is an issue for now. That's why we will ask these questions. It's always going to be a choice for the Commissioner to answer them or not. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the Commissioner, in response to the panel's report, the Met accepted corruption took place in relation to the early investigation into Daniel's murder. But do you accept that this case is not just an isolated incident of a mishandled investigation? It brings to the surface concerns of corruption and misconduct over many decades in the Met. Do you accept that?
I absolutely accept that all police services are vulnerable to corruption, and all police services in the country, and even today, on occasion, have cases of corruption. As I said, we have a very strong anti-corruption capability. We've had some very, very important results this year, which involve, sadly, corrupt officers. The good news is we have found them and we have brought them to justice, and we've got one person serving 8 years in prison, others sentenced in the court. And of course, this report goes to that. It goes to that issue, and that is an issue that all police services face. And I happen to think that the threats are very different today, and the extent is very different today from 34 years ago. Hugely different. The nature of it is very different, but it's a threat, it's a challenge, and it's one that we absolutely, deal with head on. If Her Majesty's Inspector, who, by the way, when they looked at our anti-corruption capability recently, said it was good, come and say there's more we can do, I won't be hesitating to do that. So yes, this is an issue that this report has re-raised and highlighted. In relation to murder investigation, homicide investigation, as an example, this is more an issue of competence. Now, obviously, methodologies have changed hugely since the time, in terms of things that are available to us forensically, available to us in digital world, and indeed in our professionalism, as you know. We have a very nearly 98% detection rate now. I'm not sure what it was in 34 years ago, but it was very much lower than that. And even today, we are still bringing to justice people for homicides that long ago. So we don't give up, even if there was an inability to prosecute then because of the forensics weren't available, or because there was incompetence in the original investigation. We will go back, we do review, and we will improve. And I think all of you sitting here will accept that the whole world has changed, our professionalism has changed hugely since then, and we are proud of trying to be very hard, a learning organisation. You all know Helen Ball. She leads on professionalism. She leads on making sure that we, work effectively through reviews, whether our own or external ones coming in, that we extract every lesson from things that don't go well, and indeed from things that do go well, and of course particularly in the world of homicide investigation. But it is extraordinarily rare to hear that even a sort of rumour that police corruption anywhere in the United Kingdom, let alone in this service, has affected a homicide investigation. I'm sorry to say, perhaps back then it would have been very much more common.
Okay, but still, as you describe this, it's still talking about this back then, 34 years ago. It's almost like there just isn't an acknowledgement that there are issues today. But when you look, we had the Operation Tiberius report from 2002 that talked about in the 2000s clearly showing corruption among some Met detectives. When you couple that with the Daniel Morgan case, I really want to understand what additional proactive actions, including around protecting police whistleblowers, that the Met is taking to acknowledge, which I don't feel you are, acknowledge and prevent serious and organised corruption.
I'm really sorry if I haven't convinced you that I am acknowledging it. It's an ever-present threat in policing and probably always will be. We are doing a huge amount. As I said, Her Majesty's Inspector says our capability is good. The way to be good is to acknowledge the threats, the risk, to have good intelligence, to have good analysis and assessment of that intelligence, to ensure that people feel free in the way I described, to tell you about things that are going wrong, to be proactive, not reactive, which we absolutely are, to have really good working relationships with the Crown Prosecution Service so that when we are going through a proactive investigation, which might take weeks or months, against an officer that we believe may be corrupt, or indeed against a corruptor from whatever profession they may be, and I'm sorry to say there are many in many professions, that we can get the right evidence at the right time to I want to say nail that person, to bring that person to justice. We have a huge array of capability, and I would be delighted to, in a slightly less public forum, and take you through what we do and how we do it. Of course I would.
Yeah, I'm sure we would appreciate that. The Met accepted corruption took place, as I said, in relation to that first investigation. But having read huge chunks of this panel's report, I'm not clear exactly what the admission of corruption was. What were you admitting to? What was that corruption that you have accepted took place?
So you may be referring to the, I suspect, to the public comments that were made in 2011 or 12.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not sure that, I genuinely, I understand Baroness Alone's point that the Met should be able to speak, as it were, for itself. I'm not sure I can say exactly what was in the minds of those people who said it, but I'm not denying what they said at all, and nor am I trying to undermine it. I think the reality is that we have known for a long time that there was, as is outlined in the panel, a suggestion by one person that corrupt police people might have been involved in the murder. That is not corroborated, and there is no further evidence, and the panel don't find that. Secondly, you've read probably this relevant bit of the report, that there was an extremely unhealthy set of relationships at that time. Tawdry is the word that came to my mind, between some of the local detectives and people engaged in private investigations, some of whom were undoubtedly corrupt and corruptors. And that of itself affected confidence in the investigation, definitely. You'll be aware that officers were arrested at that time, and you'll be aware that that it seems likely, or at least possible, that really shockingly, information from the investigation may have been passed by a corrupt officer to a person who was subsequently charged twice and has been found not guilty, to be clear. So those are the elements of the way in which corruption affected. But of course, the overriding thing is the kind of sense of corruption completely undermined family confidence and wider public confidence and probably witness confidence. Okay. So I am happy to outline those. I hope that's clear. You know, as you probably are aware, this is a case which has been highly litigated. So I hope that I have chosen my words appropriately. But I'm very, very happy to again apologise for that.
Baroness O'Learn and the panel clearly felt the Met were providing obstacles every step of the way. We've heard that very clearly from her this morning. Treated like litigants, it says in the report. Do you regret this and your role in it?
So I'm afraid we now are into the territory that I was talking about and the Deputy Mayor was talking about. I just believe it would be completely inappropriate at the moment to talk about that. But I would be delighted to come back and say what happened from my point of view and indeed our point of view. I really, really would. One thing I would like to say, though, is that I note a recommendation around future panels and how they might be set up and how they might work. Obviously the devil is in the detail, but broadly speaking, I absolutely think that the Home Office should reflect on how panels are set up in the future, and that we all sit back in the cold light of day and work out how we can make sure that the sorts of things that happened in the early days of that panel, including, as you know, resignations and no activity for a long time because no panel, don't reoccur. And I will enter into that process, of course, really, really openly.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Given time constraints, I'll put it into my next question, so you can move on.
Okay, so we've got Assembly Member Rogers.
Thank you. Commissioner, could you outline some of the things the Met will do differently, some of the processes that you will change, the reforms that you'll bring in as a result of the panel's report, please?
Again, I think we need to get on with our work. We've put together a team. Barbara leads it. She's new to the Met, a very, very experienced investigator and very experienced working with reviews, public inquiries and goodness knows what. She obviously has had no previous engagement with anything to do with this investigation, which is why I've chosen her. She has put together a team, and I'll ask her if you don't mind just to talk about that briefly. And they are working their way through every word of every page of the 1,200-page document. And I'm sure, as a result of their work, we will give a full and as soon as we can response to each of the recommendations. And some of those recommendations, of course, are not for us. They are for government, or they're for national policing, or the College of Policing, or some combination thereof. But we will make sure that those parties, get on with it, if I can put it that way. And the recommendations that are fair and square for us, we will look at, analyse and respond to. It may be that some of them, because they're quite complex, some of them we accept fully, some maybe partially, and it may be some we don't accept. But I'm hoping that we can, we will certainly go into this with as open and positive a frame of mind as we possibly can. And then, if you've looked, I'm sure you have looked at the report, it is littered with about 600 or 700 comments. Now, these vary in their sort of nature, and they have, quite a bit of opinion, a lot of judgment, and some criticisms and some suggestions. We need to absorb all of those and, work with the grain of those, and there may therefore be other things that we are saying, well, now we've fully absorbed it, we need to work on. But I've touched on the areas that I am, determined we have a prioritised good look at. So I've asked the HMI to come in, and they are coming. Not yet quite clear when. This is obviously supported by the Home Secretary and I'm sure the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor. And they will be, I hope, looking broadly and deeply at corruption and associated issues that this report raises. Secondly, as a leadership team, we have sat down with our wider leadership already more than once to talk about sort of professionalism in a broader sense, because you'll be aware there are other cases, and Caroline referred to or sort of referred to those in a sense in the last year, which have caused real concerns. They were looking very hard at issues like, which is not relevant to Daniel's murder or investigation, but nevertheless we're looking at the issues of social media and WhatsApp and all that. We're looking at sexual misconduct. We're looking at kind of basic professional standards, and we've got programs of work to improve that, how we respond to complaints as well. And then as a senior team, we've been talking a great deal about, you know, what more we can do to publish as much as possible to ensure that in our dealings with whoever it may be, family, public, committee, whoever, that, you know, we hold ourselves to the highest possible standards of transparency, whilst also, of course, making sure that we comply with our other legal obligations, which are many, varied and quite strong in policing. You know, we have already made, even in the last year, some changes to our training in every way around professionalism, broadly speaking, including our recruit training. Another area that the report raises is vetting. We are strong, it appears, on vetting. We have had a good Her Majesty's inspection of that. We do comply with or exceed all the standards set by the College of Policing in their approved professional practice. But recent cases cause me to say, well, is that enough? And I'm in conversation with the National lead about vetting. So those are some of the areas. I'm terribly sorry, Chair. Could I possibly ask Barbara just to talk a little bit about the team and the work they're doing?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I adopted the senior leadership role for the post-report implementation of the recommendations in late June. Some of my immediate priorities were obviously seeking to identify a suitable team, identify where that team would sit, to bring the work forward on behalf of the Metropolitan Police, and also to ensure a very smooth transition with the team who have been working with the panel to this state as regards their closure procedures and how that work progresses through in the next number of months. But obviously it's been really imperative to ensure that there is that smooth transition through the pre and post report publication dates. Going forward, our recommendation implementation work and review has the operational name of Up Drayfern. And what I'm happy to tell, we have worked at absolute pace over the last few weeks to identify and establish those suitably qualified personnel. Collectively, we believe that the most appropriate place for that team to sit as a bespoke team is within the Inquiry Review Support Command. And that is a small team that, as you will be well aware, will be able to provide a much broader knowledge around other inquiry learning, other recommendations and reviews, findings that have come through. And that sits within our continuous policing command and under the professionalism directorate. And I think that is an absolutely core place for that team to sit, to ensure that going forward we have that broad knowledge and really seek to drive and embed that culture of continuous learning and organisational learning as we go forward. For me, at this time, so it's been the identification of the team, we've had the publication of the report. The last critical member of that team was able to start with us this week. And obviously there are different and varying levels of knowledge around the report. So obviously it's been very much a priority to get through and read the report. It's a substantial document. It's a substantial report, and really take time to understand the context and consider not only the recommendations but those broader themes that are coming through the entire report. I think it's important to name just the broader work that has happened within our IRSC command, which includes the team, the Up Lorimer team, who have brought forward from the Henriquez report. It includes the Grenfell Inquiry team, and the learning certainly that I have identified and has been very keenly brought to my attention through this time is the importance of that understanding of the broader context, that we look beyond recommendations, and again we seek to drive and embed that organisational learning. And I mean, I have to say, I became a sworn officer within the Metropolitan Police on the 8th of April this year. It was a very proud day for me, and I have been really struck in this time just around the desire and drive for that continuous improvement, the investment in leadership, and the focus that there is on values and learning since I have joined the Met. And that to me really drives to the heart of so much of the professionalisation that is being done, and the desire to learn and do the right thing that does strike to the heart of public trust. Very, very much so.
Sorry, excuse me. Continue. I thought you'd finished.
Okay. So the Commissioner has touched obviously on the themes of the report at this time, and those themes are obviously extremely important. As I say, there's an overlay with other areas, but it is important to re-emphasise the point that is already made. Recommendations within the report, although they are all likely to impact the Met at different times, the Met are not the single owners for many of those recommendations. So I'm really looking forward to moving ahead, working through the recommendations with other strategic partners. Some of those recommendations currently, and they're named, they sit with IPCO, they sit with the Home Office. Many of the recommendations that impact much more broadly on national policing. I will be working with, and the team, the broader team, working with the National Police Chiefs Council, the NPCC, and the College of Policing as we go forward. Much of the work that I have already become aware of is it's in train. We work with the National Counter-Corruption Advisory Group, and through different forums. There is a lot of national work being developed, and I look forward to being able to bring that forward on behalf of the Met, and just really, as I say, drive and embed the learning that we have forward.
Just very quick follow-up. Could you just say what the ultimate output of that team will be, and what timescales you're working to, please?
So I haven't agreed timescales at this time. I haven't presented them. Obviously, will also be reporting directly to the Deputy Commissioner and the Commissioner. We are still very much in that phase of careful consideration as regards what the recommendations are. I do not want to create unrealistic timescales that then we don't achieve as fulsomely as we would certainly hope to do. And I think that's a really critical point around that. What do we hope to achieve? I hope to be able to reflect learning that and the issues that have been highlighted in the report. I hope to have an absolutely open and transparent approach with the public that gives the public confidence around some of the issues and provide evidence around some of the issues that have been raised within the report. And equally, I'm repeating the point, but it is around absolutely ensuring that lessons are learned from what previous inquiries have been, to ensure that there is appropriate governance and audit in place, that it isn't just a tick box exercise against a recommendation that the Met have primacy over, that it is actually sustainable, it is embedded, and it's driven forward in the true sense of the assessment and the actions that we agree as we go forward. But it's early days to be able to give any form of timescale.
Thanks, Chair.
Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you. Commissioner, Section 502 of the report of the Daniel Morgan Independent Panel includes this statement: unwarranted assurances were given to the family and the Metropolitan Police placed the reputation of the organisation above the need for accountability and transparency. The lack of candour and the repeated failure to take a fresh, thorough and critical look at past failings are all symptoms of institutional corruption, which prioritises institutional reputation over public accountability. Now, I acknowledge you've said that that's not the Met that you see today, and you've also said that this new definition of institutional corruption doesn't sit comfortably with previous definitions of corruption. And you've also said that you want to come back with a considered response to the overall panel report. But has it made you consider any of your own priorities as leader of the Metropolitan Police?
It's certainly reinforced a priority, that's for sure. And I mentioned the conversations that I've been having with the senior leadership around professionalism more generally, and standards. And it gives, a potentially a turbocharge to that work. One thing Barbara didn't mention is that we've set up I'm not trying to be critical at all, but it suddenly occurred to me that one thing she didn't mention is we've set up a reference group, and obviously all this work that she will be leading, reporting directly to Steve and me, will be highly informed by subject matter experts and the public, I've no doubt, as we go forward. So it's going to kind of evolve and iterate, and that's one reason why we can't say exactly what the product will be, but it's turbocharged potentially that work, and it also, I think, has, as I said, has caused us to sit down and ask, when might it be when we might appear more closed than we intended? When might it be that we do fail to put some piece of material out when we could have done? And how do we put in place processes to hold ourselves to an even higher standard in relation to that openness? Now, obviously we are, as I said, very highly scrutinised. The officer on the street is massively scrutinised, probably more than any other professional. And we have an awful lot of different aspects of governance and accountability. We, I think I'm right in saying, produce more answers to freedom of information requests, perhaps than any other single organisation in the country. And we want to think about how we can, reduce the freedom of information requests, perhaps, and increase the amount of publicly available information. So it's kind of given a turbocharge to those areas. But I do, again, want to come back with a considered response on this.
Thank you. Now, in this committee, we've heard you on several occasions talk about the importance of supporting your officers and of building confidence in the police.
Yeah.
This was stated by you to be very high on your list of goals for your leadership. Now, the panel report warns somewhat against taking an overly defensive approach and talks about the value of openness and not being overly defensive of the institution as a way of building confidence. So are you confident that in a future situation where you became aware of allegations of corruption within a section of the Met Police, that your leadership and guidance would err on the side of transparency and accountability rather than protecting the reputation of your officers and teams?
Yes.
Thank you, that's quick. Then you also talked, and your answer to my first question was, seriously sort of talking about upping your game. Can you give an assurance to the committee today that you and your senior officers appearing before us will act as if there is a duty of candour in existence, even if this is not yet formalised in statute or terms of reference? And certainly the things you've been saying suggest.
So, as I say, I think we do, if colleagues are may have looked or may not have looked, but a more recent duty that is explicit within the Code of Ethics, requires us to give appropriate. I think the word being appropriate is important. Cooperation and then it goes towards, as individuals, being candid very strongly. And we have the Code of Ethics, and then we have the misconduct regulations, and the two of them, put a big onus on individuals to cooperate appropriately. However, I'm sorry to be slightly cracked record. Being a police officer is always about making judgments. It's always about making balanced decisions. You've got a lot of different things you have to consider. And as being a leader also. And when I am deciding, if I even went back to your last question, whether I can tell everybody everything about everything, I have to think, first of all, about right to life, people's right to privacy and their data being protected and personal information being protected. I have to think about not undermining a court process, due process. I have to protect secrets, that's proper secrets, secrets defined properly. So that's secret methodologies, that's the names of informants. I could go on. So sometimes we would love to say a lot more than we can, because if we do, in our desire to be open, which is a very important good, we will transgress the law and do something which we would be rightly heavily criticised for. So it's always a balancing act. And I know members of the committee understand this, but what I think I'm saying is that we will be asking ourselves again, are we being over cautious? Or we think our default position is to be open, but are there cases where it's not like that?
Thank you. Now I've got one final question, which is that a duty of candour implies not only full but timely information to be provided to scrutiny bodies like this one. We actually have a list of 105 outstanding requests for pieces of information from the Met in our action log. This is the one from the 23rd of June agenda. So there's a few more from today for the papers for today's agenda. But there were 10 from 2021, 56 from 2020, 33 from 2019 and 6 from 2018. All these are questions to which written answers were promised in good faith. So if this information is not forthcoming, sometimes 2 years after the promises are made, how does this sit with that duty of candour and accountability that the Daniel Morgan report regards as lacking in its findings and vital for restoring public confidence?
Well, again, there's a thing here about balance. I have a veritable industry of people providing answers to questions. I think on average we get somewhere between 70 and 100 of the Mayor's questions that come the way of the Met to try to answer in a very timely fashion, or at least not answer, but give him the facts and the detail that he might have to work from. This committee does ask some sometimes very probing and big questions, and I'm not saying in any sense that I I resent the volume. I do sometimes resent the on behalf of my teams, the nature, the duplication, the poor, between us all, perhaps, processes could be increased. Freedom of information, I can't remember the figures, but we have tens of thousands of those requests, which we service according to the timescales of as best we possibly can, the Information Commissioner. And I should say that in relation to, the various things that we are under a duty to disclose, we have hugely improved, just as we've hugely improved our vetting in the last couple of years, we've hugely improved the timeliness of data access requests, of which there are another many tens of thousands, and our freedom of information requests. I wasn't aware of the figures you just put to me. I will have to look at that. I'm sure some of them will have been completely superseded by probably 1, 2, 3, 4 questions that have subsequently been asked in this committee or has been made available to the committee, but I don't know. I can assure you that we try, that it is hugely expensive and on occasion can feel quite burdensome to the people who are doing it, piece of work, but something we take seriously and we respect, and it is part of our, as I say, I think more than any other police service probably in the world. And I have a lot of international colleagues who come here and say, if I'm honest, they say, oh, Cress, imagine living with that, the amount of time and effort you people, instead of policing the streets, put into this. I say, this is part of the public holding us to account. We do it, we have to do it, and we will do it. But I think sometimes we could improve the processes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly member, can I just remind all our assembly members we have an extreme time issue now, so people are going to nip along. And if I could ask my guests to shorten any answers and any detail you could provide to us in writing that you may have to omit in your answer. Assembly member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. My first question, Chair, to the Commissioner has already been answered about the implementation of the recommendations for the MAT. So my follow-up question is to the Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor, we've heard the panel complain about the lack of statutory powers to complete its work. And Daniel's brother also complained that there was no judicial inquiry into the case. In 2012, this committee wrote to the then Home Secretary, Theresa May, calling for a public judicial inquiry. However, we were told that the Home Secretary thought a Hillsborough-style panel was the right approach for the case. Do you feel that a judicial inquiry or a QC-led review would have been more appropriate?
The way that the panel was set up, as you can see in the report itself and the comments of Baroness alone and the recommendations, the way in which the panel was set up caused problems around disclosure and caused some of the issues that we, in terms of the delays. I think you can see that from the report. That's not an opinion I've just thought of myself. You can see that in the report, and that's why there's recommendations to the government to think very seriously in the future as to how they set up panels and the statutory requirements of that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Assembly member. I appreciate your brevity. Assembly member Devonish.
Deputy Mayor, do you and the Mayor think the existing Met culture can at times harm fighting crime?
I think we've been very clear, and as has the Commissioner, that there has to be improvements in terms of transparency and accountability, and those two things aren't sort of ethereal goods, of value without actually making an impact in the real world. So the impact it has in the real world is around trust and confidence. And again, as we know with other areas when we talk about trust and confidence, for example, the Mayor's Action Plan on trust and confidence of the black community, that has an impact on the relations between the Metropolitan Police and communities. So it can have an impact on ability to reduce crime. Of course, yes, it can, because of because of the links that you have between why does trust and confidence matter so much, not just for the Metropolitan Police, for any police service. It matters because that relationship between the public and the police matters, because at the heart of it is confidence around ability to report, confidence about ability to engage, confidence about coming forward as witnesses.
Once the final report is out, will you and the Mayor be making a statement in terms of what you're going to do to make sure things improve?
Which final report, sorry?
The final report after the panel, the response to the panel.
So the in terms of the oversight that we'll have from MOPAC and the Mayor, we'll be very clear about that, and we will make it as transparent as accountable as possible, because I think we too have to learn lessons as to how do we improve our transparency and accountability. So we will be looking at that.
Thank you. I was going to ask the Commissioner how and when you will respond in full to the independent panel, but I think you've answered to say you haven't got a date yet. But would you agree with me? I was slightly concerned by your colleague's answer that this could be going on for an awful long time before we do get the final report. Can you give at least a view that it will be, by the end of this calendar year, or by the spring of next year, or by the summer of next year? Because I think the fact is, you would agree with me, having this hanging over the Met is not good for anybody.
I agree we need to get on with the work, and I agree we need to publish what we can as soon as we can. And we will, as Barbara made very clear, follow through and make sure it's not just okay, we've accepted that recommendation and we're doing it, but it is, embedded, sustainable, and so forth. I think it would be very unwise to put any timescales on it at the moment. If you look at the panel report, you can see that, and I think I can say this properly, that there was an expectation that they might be able to finish their work by another party within a year, and we kept saying that will never. That even if you had the fairest of winds, that won't happen. It's bigger than that, and I don't think that helped anybody. That there was this sort of word around that it might be a 12-month job, and in fact, as we know, it's sort of nine years for various different reasons. Now, I'm not going to put a deadline on anything, but I am going to say we will seek to get out a response to the recommendations as soon as we can. There's a whole load of other work to do, and sort of responding to the themes that we need to do. And of course, in parallel, there are other processes going on by other bodies, not least the IOPC. So we're going to move speedily. We've got a well-resourced and highly skilled team. They will be supported by subject matter experts, heads of profession, people from the outside world, policing and beyond, and I will ensure that they are able to get on with it as quickly as possible. As you've heard, Barbara will be reporting directly to the Deputy Commissioner and to me, and some of you will have seen the way we worked on Larimar, and it will be very like that, I think, which is that nobody could look back and think that we were, tardy or not putting enough effort into it. But I'm not going to put a deadline on anything at this stage.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Chair, for the Deputy Mayor, how will MOPAC monitor the Met's actions to respond to the findings and recommendations and ensure that it delivers real change?
So we have a number of mechanisms in terms of oversight as to how we scrutinise the Met and scrutinise the work of the Metropolitan Police. We have the Oversight Board, which I expect that we will want to have reports to. We need to work out what the best rhythm of oversight is to make sure that the Met can get on with the work as quickly as possible, but also that there is there is oversight and scrutiny. And again, as Assembly Member Devonish asks, there's accountability and transparency in relation to that. There is also the mechanism of the regular bilaterals that I hold with the Commissioner, as does the Mayor hold with the Commissioner. So we have a number of mechanisms, and we'll have to look at those as to what's the best way of holding the Met to account on this.
Thank you. My next question is to the Commissioner. You have stated a couple of times already this morning, afternoon, that the Met is actually scrutinised probably more than any other police service in the world. And I'm glad to see that you would agree with what I agree with you, that is a strength of the Met. But obviously, to get to that position of scrutiny, we have to go through a process. And that's what we've done now with the investigation. Commissioner, you agreed, as per the panel's terms of reference, to provide exceptional and full disclosure of documents and the home's computer records. Can you explain why you were unable to do that and why that didn't happen?
I do absolutely restate, I think we are very heavily scrutinised, and this would probably be the moment to say, this is as professional a Met Police as I have ever seen. these are really good people who are working in an incredibly transparent environment, mostly, who are doing their best in difficult circumstances, who abhor corruption and will ring up, report, talk about a colleague who is falling below their standards, just like that. And all of this should not take away from their, in my view, extraordinary capabilities and what they do for our public. I can't talk about the way in which we worked with the panel now. I really, really look forward to discussing this with the committee in the future.
Thank you. When the panel was initially set up in 2013, you were the senior officer and in charge of supporting the panel's work. Why was your preference for the panel chair alone to be able to review the information and documents from the Met rather than the committee as a whole?
Again, that's something that I need to come back and talk to you about. Maybe it's hopefully, trying to be quick, Chair, it's helpful to say, I take full responsibility for what happened then. I was in charge, and I believe, as I've said publicly before, that I acted with integrity throughout and did my very best to discharge my duties to the family and of course my other duties.
But Commissioner, I understand that and thank you for being frank about that. But why did you make that decision?
I'm sorry. We've been sort of publicly accused of being defensive. I am extraordinarily aware that the fact that I can't at this stage answer that question could look like I am being closed or obfuscating. I am absolutely not. That is why I spoke to the committee through the clerks several days ago to say you do understand there are a series of questions that it would be inappropriate for me to answer at this stage. And I think we've heard, and by the way, we haven't discussed this, that the Deputy Mayor seems to be in exactly the same position as me in relation to that. So rest assured that when I am able to discuss that, I absolutely will.
Okay. Perhaps then you could answer this. So we've just heard from Baroness O'Lone about the information and how it was provided. So she talked about, rather than files, crates of loose paper arriving, which obviously took a lot of time to go through. Would you agree that that was quite slapdash, and perhaps some people would say unprofessional? And can you explain why that happened?
No, I wouldn't agree. Again, I'm happy to talk about that when I come back.
Assembly member, why don't we stop there and move on to, and we'll come
Chair,
back
sorry,
to...
I have one question for the Deputy Assistant Commissioner, which I think she can answer.
Okay, if she can answer, go for it.
Thank you. Assistant Deputy Commissioner, as you are undertaking the review within the Met, will it be you that's responsible for ensuring that any future independent inquiry on access to homes will happen efficiently? And if it's not you, whose role and who will be responsible for it?
Well, obviously that question is reflective of one of the recommendations that there is within within the overall report. So I think there is much broader issue for the status of panels and inquiries going forward. Will it be me for any future inquiry that will have that decision? I honestly can't answer that at this moment in time, because it'll really depend on where that would come in. But what I can provide assurance around is that the work that we will be bringing forward will be exploring these broader issues, exploring them in as detailed a manner as we possibly can. That there will be advices in place, so as if it isn't me, it will be there will be advice and guidance there in place. And again, I mean, the principle of openness and transparency sits at the very core of what it is we seek to do. And sometimes there are boundaries on that or parameters that need to be worked through other legislative responsibilities. So I think that's
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Hall. Excuse me.
Chair, actually, I'm well aware of the time pressures.
Very much.
Could we potentially get my question answered in writing, if possible?
Appreciate that. Thank you. Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Commissioner. Having read parts of the report, having listened to Baroness O'Lone and her colleagues this morning, it was just so depressing and upsetting because, I mean, this does not reflect the Met that I've come to work with over the past few years. But nevertheless, there certainly was an impression that many things were put in place to stop the board doing their job. It took 20 months until they received their first documents, which is unacceptable. And she said that there was an adversarial approach taken to requests for information. Now, the thing that worries me, which must worry you, is that this will do huge damage to the trust and confidence in the Metropolitan Police, which absolutely none of us want to see. Baroness O'Lone actually said, and I'm quoting her, she has not seen anything that could assume or could assure her, beg your pardon, that this could not be going on today. So how can you assure us that the hurdles will never be put in place again going forward when independent investigations are going on? Because the Met should have nothing to hide. Things should be out there when a proper investigation is done. And it's the only way we can start to get trust and faith brought back into the Metropolitan Police, which is what we need.
So again, I look forward to coming back and putting the record straight on some of the facts and explaining what we went through and why. I absolutely agree. We have nothing to hide. There was absolutely no advantage for the Met, quite the reverse, and there would not be in any other situation in slowing things down. And we will ensure, hopefully with better setting up, were there to be such a process in the future, that we approach that again with the fullest of cooperation and a real positive feel, and that if there are lessons from for us as much as for others on how this went, that we make sure we learn these. But as you say, it doesn't. This is a very sorry read. We haven't touched on the so-called Abelard 2 investigation at all. That is a very sorry read, including behaviour by one officer, which has been very highly criticised by a judge, and also subsequently long investigations leading to no prosecution, which the panel, as you probably have observed, take issue with the CPS. That is shaming. Much of what is in the report about the past is shaming. That's not the Met it's not the Met you see. But it is very difficult. Now, here we have this issue that you've talked about, that a perception has been raised that we have been obstructive. I look forward to coming back to talk about that.
Thank you. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Member Devonish.
Chair, the Commissioner's already answered my question.
Very much. Assembly Member Arbed.
Commissioner, are you able to elaborate on why there was such a length of time from the incident of the officer being spied on by the News of the World and the Met properly investigating the potential links between its own officers and the press?
So I think I do need to write back about that. There's an awful lot of history and an awful lot of detail here. I would simply say, although it is rather, frankly, skirted over in the report, there was a massive effort, just as there's been massive efforts at various times by previous commissioners to step up in the 80s, in the 90s, again in the early 2000s, our anti-corruption capability, the recognition that inappropriate, unhealthy, potentially corrupt relationships with the media, or inappropriate action by the media, some of which is totally entangled, and that therefore we needed to take that on. This has been a repeated issue for the Met. Again, to go back to Assemblymember Hall's phrase, if you looked at the Met now and you put any kind of ruler through it in terms of our relationships with the media, in terms of structure, systems, process, guidance, culture, leadership, action, we are utterly different from even the Leveson report. What is skirted over in the panel report is the massive effort that did go in relation to making the changes. The Filkin review, I led on our work with Leveson and our response to that, and a completely different culture. I led on Wheating and Elvedon, the two massive investigations which brought corrupt officers, corrupt prison people, other people to justice, and of course resulted in, I think I'm right in saying, the organisation that you're talking about, in fact, closing. I would like to come back to you with a written answer about the delays that you are apparently talking about, because I don't want to give misinformation here. But suffice to say, if you read the panel report, you can see the matter was dealt with and examined in detail very soon after, as soon as the allegation was made that was what was happening. This is a pernicious and difficult area for policing, or has been in the past. Journalists, quite properly, are protected in the way in which we can investigate them. And of course, as we know, as with other professions, the vast majority of them perform a very important public duty and do it very well. But every now and then you do have ones who seek to corrupt police officers, and you have officers who are open to corruption, and you have maliciously inspired stories. The theme of media relationships runs through this report. It's one that's very close to my chest. I feel very confident in where we now are. I need to give you a written answer to that.
Very much, and we appreciate the written answer. Thank you. And my final question. When we spoke, as you're aware, I'm sure a couple of weeks ago, we had Daniel's brother here at the committee, and he said that he'd met with yourself and Simon Foy in 2013 to discuss the report into the collapse of the trial in 2011. Can you explain why you were present at that meeting? Because as it's our understanding that at the time you were the head of counter-terrorism for the Met, and so what was your role at that meeting?
I have read the transcript of Mr. Morgan's appearance, and I think he is confused in this instance, in that the report that we were there to discuss was published publicly in May 2012. So it wasn't, I think he did say 2013, it was 2012. To go to your question, previously you'll be aware that the Abelard 2 investigations and then subsequent failed prosecution, as you know, undermined by the handling of the disclosure process, which on the one hand was enormous, and the judge, I think, made some comment like it was almost impossible, but it was huge, but it wasn't. The prosecution had to stand up and say, I'm afraid we can't give confidence in our disclosure process. And secondly, by the issues with the protected witness. That was all led by Assistant Commissioner John Yates. Subsequently, as some colleagues here will well remember, Assistant Commissioner Yates left the Met, retired in 2011, I think, at a time actually when the Met senior leadership went through a huge number of changes. I was one of the two consistent people on the board. My then colleague Lynn Owens, who was the Assistant Commissioner of Specialist Crime, took on everything to do with this matter. I say everything, perhaps not the professionalism investigations, but she took on everything in the aftermath of the trial and started to progress things. Lynn left the Met in, I think, February 2012. So you had a new commissioner, now Lord Hogan Howe, who needed to have one senior officer leading these matters. And he cast around, and at the time, as it happens, I was leading Wheating, Elvedon, Leveson. I was doing the post-Stephen Lawrence prosecution work. I had a number of other historic investigations. I had just become the Assistant Commissioner Counter-Terrorism, somewhat unexpectedly, and we had the Olympics very soon. So I had many different responsibilities, and he looked at whether I should do it or not, and he looked at my colleagues, as I understand it, and you might have thought, which is I suspect where your question is coming from, that it would be more natural for this to sit with Assistant Commissioner in Specialist Crime, who was very new, and in that way probably that would be healthy, although I had had no involvement beyond attending one meeting and some sort of various discussions in generality about this case. So I was suitable in one sense, but unfortunately that person had a conflict of interest. He couldn't do it. Nobody else was qualified to do it. So the Commissioner asked me, as the qualified person on the board, at Assistant Commissioner level, appropriate level to give it the gravity it needed to do this. And I remained the Assistant Commissioner in charge until I left the Met a few years later. It was then subsequently taken on by Martin Hewitt. I should specify, though, this probably might seem like too much detail, but just to say that everything to do with the professionalism investigations into, for example, Mr. Cook and the various allegations about how he had behaved, that was led by the then Deputy Commissioner, Craig Mackey.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sophie. That brings us to the end of our formal questions. I'd just like to wrap up by saying thank you very much for your offer to come back, Commissioner. We really appreciate the amount of effort you've put into this, because this is obviously a very big thing. And I think we need to put on record the fact that even the report alluded to the fact that the rank and file officers, that the vast majority of police officers are hard-working in their very tough circumstances and serve the public very well. We are talking about a very small, select group of people. I also accept your assertion that the modern Met is a very different place to the Met that we may have been discussing. But of course, it is a duty of this committee and the Deputy Mayor as well to keep a slight upward pressure on anti-corruption capability within the Met. So again, we thank you for turning up. But now I officially release you to the wild, back to your very busy job, where we will just take care of our few short bits of formal business. Again, thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.
Chair, in terms of next steps, no doubt we will be having a further meeting once we get the formal response from the NPS to and as well as MOPAC's issues. Can I ask us to explore? There are two issues which I think are non-contentious, but I just want to save time in terms of the officers. Explore the issues and scope out whether there is an appetite amongst the political groups on the London Assembly to support the power of the statutory duty of candour, as well as there's an interesting recommendation that relates very much to this body, which is a further panel recommendation about the interest of transparency and public accountability at all public institutions should be under a duty to cooperate fully with independent scrutiny bodies created by government, such as the panel. It refers to their panel, but it could also refer to scrutiny bodies of police and crime. If we could look at that, I'm not saying we will do it, but explore it when it comes back to us, because it might be an interesting campaigning point of where we can talk to our national legislators if it's got legs, if it's worth pursuing. We need to have a conversation about it, and I'd just like that work to be undertaken when it comes back.
We'll talk to party leads about that. It seems like something we could investigate. You're just saying we'll have an initial look to see if we will have a look.
I'm not saying we should, but let's explore it.
Absolutely. I'm prepared to do that. I think it's a great idea, and let's see how group leads, etc., feel about it. Right, where am I? Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion of the monthly report from MOPAC?
Noted.
Can you also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with deputy chairman and party group lead members to agree any output arising from this meeting?
Agreed.
Can I ask the committee to note the work programme and the additional activities undertaken, namely our informal briefing with the MPS on the Euros 2020? Noted, thank you. Can we also delegate authority to me in consultation with Deputy Chairman and Party Group Lead members to agree a letter to the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime on the support provided to safer neighbourhood boards?
Agreed.
The date of our next meeting will be confirmed in due course. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting.
Thanks, Sean.